Hello world, I'm a shorter than average girl from down under, and I am so sorry for the hiatus on this subject, but we're finally going back to Deltora with the Shadowlands series. So just because the Shadowlord was defeated and banished from Deltora, it doesn't mean that everything is all and well. The enemy is still alive, and although the battle has been won, the war isn't over. And the next two Deltora Quest series actually look at the complex aftermath of a dictatorship, the consequence of it on the people as a whole, and on them as individuals. Most stories end with the evil being destroyed or removed, and then we get the happily ever after epilogue at the end, which is generally set years after the climax, with the main characters settling down in the countryside, far away from any of the drama where everything has eventually settled. Authors rarely go into the complexity of building anew, with a population which has been deeply traumatized. And the reason that they don't do it is because it doesn't really make for classically good literature, which I find arguable, but they are hard to write. To be honest, all the hard work kind of starts after the enemy is destroyed. And the reason why it's so difficult is because the unity that everyone had due to their common goal of defeating that evil has dissipated. And now each person has their own new goals set out, leading to everything being 100 times more complicated because everyone's doing their own thing. And the greatest catastrophe in human politics and histories usually comes from the mismanagement of the aftermath of war or famine or epidemics. And so you see some of these stories take the route of new revolutions, new villains being made instead of the whole trying to build back better, eventually reaching a happy ever after. And now, although Deltora itself is a fictional land, and so it's got huge plot devices, which make all the complexities a little bit easier, the fact that Emily Rodda even addresses this in a kid's book should be considered a literary win. So even though, yeah, it's technically oversimplified, we're still going to talk about it, starting off with Series 2. But if you're only here for the book reviews, then you can go to the time shown on the screen right now, or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk story. Of all the Deltora Quest series, this one is the most different in my opinion. It predominantly focuses on building the world of Deltora, basically breaking the facade of the simplicity of the world that we were introduced to in the original series. And it also provides a little bit of context for some of the questions that we had unanswered from the end of the Return to Del. And also, it's the only series where you don't have like a mini villain in each book. Instead, it's just the Shadowlord overall. And so as a consequence of that, it has a very different layout from the books that we saw in Series 1. And that's why I found it so difficult to try and do a review of each of these books separately. You really can't tackle the themes when you consider each of the books on their own. They have to be brought together, despite each one having a stronger focus on a particular theme. Whereas the series in book 1 were kind of like complete stories on their own, which then built up a bigger picture at the end. And I guess that's kind of the genius of Series 1 and, spoiler alert, Series 3. But that's not to put down Series 2. It's still good in its own right. And it doesn't by any means mean that there's only one storyline going on. We actually have multiple, but they're interweaved with one another, which makes it more of a mature read at the end. As I said in the intro, now that the Shadowlord is gone, each person in Deltora wants a different thing. Our characters' goals aren't exactly aligned anymore, which creates a rift between them and this uncomfortable distrust, particularly between Lief and Jasmine. And it's the intentions and the goals of different characters which present as the different storylines. And it builds the main theme of the series, trust. A very real consequence of hardship is it obliges people to create bonds of dependency for their own survival. And then when that hardship is lifted, what happens to that bond? The motor of a common interest is now gone, and so gaps start to show that must be addressed, or else the relationship will fall apart. And this is the dilemma that our characters face. So let's quickly run through them all. Del is overrun by Deltorans having requests for their new king, and Lief, Doom, and Sharn are basically doing everything they can to get the situation under control. As the head of the Royal Guard, Barda takes an army to Norads to free everyone from the Rakachas, and Jasmine is kind of struggling with finding her place in this new world. So already, we've got 3 plot lines. But of course, the Shadowlord isn't just gonna make it easy for them. So when Barda arrives at Norads, he finds it abandoned, and Tom tells him that the Rakashas had marched everyone to the Shadowlands. Back in Del, numerous attempts have been made on Lief's life, and so he's now been forced to isolate himself from the people, with the exceptions of Doom and Sharn. And Jasmine? She's found Fallow's old Palantir, discovering that she actually has a sister named Faith in the Shadowlands. Unbeknownst to each other, our trio actually have the same goal: to save the prisoners of the Shadowlands. And it's the request which has been parroted by basically all the subjects wanting to hear from their king. But of course, Lief's responsibility prevents him from rounding up a gang and jumping into another adventure. So he and Doom, after weeks of research, sneak themselves to Tora. Now, by this point, rumors have been circulating that Lief had gone to Tora to find himself a Toran bride. And this has Jasmine seething. So whilst Barda is being a good boy and waiting for Lief to return, Jasmine finds a new ally in Glock, and the two of them decide to make their own way to the Shadowlands to save the prisoners. And here we're introduced to new crucial characters to the story, Joseph and Ranesh. Joseph was the chief librarian at the time of King Elton, which is Lief's grandfather, and basically he was ordered to destroy the library's most important historical records, the Deltora annuals. And of course, this request was made by Pirrans. So to save the annuals, Joseph fakes his own death, sets fire to the library whilst running away with the actual annuals. Ranesh is a runaway boy from Where Waters Meet, and they strike an unlikely father-son relationship. Now that the Shadowlord is gone, it was time for the annuals to be restored back to the castle's library, filling up all the gaps in the history that the Shadowlord doesn't want anyone to find out. So they turn to the one person in the trio that honestly doesn't give a damn, Jasmine. After playing nice with Joseph and Ranesh, she shows them to Sharn, who actually does give a damn. But then she realizes that the annuals could actually be useful for her and Glock. They tell a story of an underground passage to the Shadowland, a passage starting in the location called the Osmine Hills. So that's where Jasmine and Glock were headed. Now, going back to Lief and Doom, they were making arrangements with a Toran noble girl called Marilyn to come to Del with them. At the same time, Lief was trying to find a way to use magic to subdue the Shadowlord long enough for them to bring the prisoners back. Unfortunately, Toran magic isn't strong enough, but Xeon tells them about a pipe said to be that powerful, the Pirran pipe. But of course, all records of the pipe were destroyed with the Deltora annuals, so there was no way of finding out anything about the pipe. When Lief returns to Del, he learns about Jasmine's disappearance, and he be shooketh. So after hiding Marilyn in the library, he, Barda, and Jinx head off after Jasmine and Glock. Now, the hills aren't exactly the safest places in Deltora. There are these werewolf-like creatures called the Grannis that kind of have a tendency to eat anything. So of course, Jinx makes a run for it and leaves Barda and Lief to fend for themselves. But eventually they do make it to the entrance of this underground path, which is guarded by a sleeping dragon. They sneak past the dragon and eventually fall into a deep hole and land in water. Water which turns out to be the underground sea. and this sea is inhabited by these dog-like Pirrans. So, for context, Pyrrha was originally the land to the north of Deltora, protected by the magic of a musical pipe, the Pirran pipe, where a piper would play a song each day to keep evil at bay, and after a piper passes, elections take place to select the next one. One such occasion, and three fabulous pipers were excellent candidates: Plume, Aaron, and Kiras. The parents formed into three divisions behind each of their favorite pipers, and they couldn't decide who they were going to pick. An outsider came to their aid, suggesting that they should split the pipe into its three components and give each piper one, which they stupidly agreed to. Lo and behold, this stranger turned out to be the Shadowlord, and that was the day that he took over Pyrrha and made it into the Shadowlands. And the Pirrans used their magic to run and hide underground, and that's where they've been living ever since. But of course, each tribe blames the other, and so they do not live together. Each disciple of a particular piper took an island and named it after their beloved candidate. And it is these waters that our trio and Glock find themselves in. All four of them have just been captured by the Plume clan, and they were just to be used as an offering for something called the Fair. But this is when Lief makes a deal with the Plume's people, offering that they would kill the Fair in exchange that Plume's people would use their magic to keep the light for them to be able to see this creature called the Fair. And guess what? The Fair turned out to be a giant octopus that has sharp hooks at the end of its tentacles and produces this sticky web to catch its prey. And after a long one-sided battle, Glock turns the odds by stabbing the Fair right in its throat. But unfortunately, he gets crushed by a tentacle. And by the time that our trio reaches Glock, he's already fading away. With his final breath, he gives Jasmine his family's talisman. It's basically a bag that he keeps around his neck that has all these trinkets, one of which was the mouthpiece of the Pirran pipe. An heirloom, Glock says, he got from his ancestor who had slain a goblin. After saving the Plumes people from the fair, they gave Glock a proper burial of a hero, and they were off to the next island, the one belonging to the Oran tribe. Now at this point, Lief and Barda didn't know anything about faith, and Jasmine was just learning about how important this parent pipe is. And Marlene and Radesh were getting to know each other pretty well, which was making Joseph very uncomfortable because he was hearing the rumors that this was going to be Lief's wife. So he asks Radesh to meet him in the kitchen, where he meets an old friend, the woman that took him and Ranesh in. But due to the Shadowlord, she is now deaf, and her sons had been taken to the Shadowlands. So Joseph kind of tells her that Lief's fiance is upstairs, and that's when their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a giant roided woman named Lyndall. And she had Jinx slung over her shoulder. So Lyndall is a new character to us, but she isn't a new character in universe. Basically, we're given the context that somehow she was in the Resistance, so she knows Doom really well. And that's why when she comes in, she asks for him straight away. Basically, after running away from Lief and Barda, Jinx had accidentally knocked boots with Lyndall, and he told her that he had tried his hardest, but unfortunately the king was dead. So of course she had to drag him along to Dell so that he could give that news to Doom in its face. After recounting his heroic tale of saving the king, Sharon actually started to look after Jinx, while Doom and Lyndall both go to the Osmine Hills to check things out for themselves, because no one be believing Jinx. He basically just wanted to escape before Doom came back because he knew he was screwed. But of course he wanted to get a bit of cash so that he could survive the next few years. So when Sharon is asleep, he sneaks out and tries to look for something valuable, and that's when he stumbles into Marilyn's room. There, he finds a cake. So he eats it, but he ends up... Now, Marilyn had known that something was off with the cake. She kind of used her Tauran magic, and so she was off to tell Sharon about it when Jinx found it instead. But given that only Joseph and Renesh knew about Marilyn's existence here, Sharon started to suspect Renesh, which Marilyn refuted and confessed to having a little bit of a thing for him. Now going back to the underground sea, Lief, Barda, and Jasmine are constantly being tested, from losing their way to narrowly escaping the natural dangers living in the underworld, to their constant bickering and fighting stemming from the secrets that they're all holding in themselves and feeling guilty about at the same time. And that's when the eel-riding Arryns find them. So the Arryns have this obsession with the truth, more specifically not lying, and that reason is hidden in the tribe's history. When the Arryn tribe reached this part of the underground sea, some saw its beauty, whilst others missed their home in Pirra. So those who missed Pirra made a magical dome which would create the illusion that they were still overhead. But this magic hinges on the fact that you believe what you're seeing. And those who thought that the outside world was beautiful were kinda interrupting this magic. As a consequence, a deal was struck. Those who wanted to leave the island could, but they would have to give up their magic to those living inside the dome. And the people inside the dome would use their magic not only to keep the illusion alive, but to light the caves so that the Arryns on the outside could still live a happy life. But the light faded over time. Now, the trio met the Arryns on the outside of the dome, and they believed that the Arryns inside the dome had lied to them. And now that the dome has been there for years, it is completely surrounded by these giant arachnids, so they can't just go there and ask for answers. Our trio have to get inside the dome if they want the second piece of the Pirran pipe. So the Arryns take advantage of this and ask for them to find some answers. When our trio finally make it inside the dome, they find that it's nearly empty. The Arryns inside were so immersed in their illusion that they didn't have many children. And so with less and less Arryns to keep the magic going inside the dome, everything was starting to fade, including the light. And now that our trio had just stormed into the dome, their illusion was completely broken, and the arachnids were quickly making their way inside. The remainder of the Arryns chose to stay in the dome and die, so our trio managed to rescue the second piece of the pipe and return to the outside Arryns. In gratitude for their help in restoring their magic, they give them the second piece of the pipe. And so now it's time to go to Creus. The Creons were very welcoming to our trio, and when Lief asks them for the last piece of the pipe, they agree for exchange for their magical object, the belt. And Lief agrees to this, because he can't actually take the belt outside the borders, and they're going to go to Expera right now, so it felt like a good deal. But when the Creons receive the belt, they feel that it has no power. And there was another problem. Lief, Barda, and Jasmine don't exactly know how to play a pipe. So the Creon's chief's son, Emless, volunteers to go with them to the Shadowlands so that he could play the pipe. And so our four heroes are sent off to the Shadowlands. Now, the Shadowlands are probably not what you think they are. They're a barren wasteland riddled with zombie-like dysmorphed beings and biological trash. Not only that, there were these two large industrial buildings, the Shadow Arena and the Factory. The air itself in the Shadowlands leads people to feel dread and despair. And so, barely surviving the creatures in the Shadowlands with the help of the pipe, Lief is dragged into an underground cavern by the Shadowlands rebel group, a new resistance. Now, these rebels are Deltorians, some of which have been mutated and mutilated by the Shadowlord. The three that our heroes meet at the moment is a Glock lookalike named Jeers, Brienne of Lees, which was the winner of the Rithmir Games the year before Jasmine, and Joseph's friend's son, Mikkel, a young man who has unfortunately been mutilated by the Shadowlord to have talons instead of hands. But Mikkel was actually one of the lucky ones. All those zombie-like dysmorphed creatures were mutated Deltorans who had eventually lost their minds. Now, the rebels think that our heroes are spies, and so Jasmine proves that they're not by showing Jira's Glock's talisman, except for the pipe's mouthpiece, of course. But it actually turns out that Jira's is Glock's younger brother. And so, because of that, they do start trusting them. As they're heading to the Shadow Arena, they get attacked by a brawl. And still alive, decaying bodies of Grey Guards. So they eventually get split up. And Jasmine uses this opportunity to head to the factory instead of the Shadow Arena, because she thinks that Faith would be there. And the horrors! So it turns out that Grey Guards like plants that are grown in these huge tanks. And then there were these two people observing all these growing Grey Gods, one of which was a level 3 owl that looks exactly like Prandine and Fallow, and the other was Terra in a lab coat, where Terra was actually a higher level than the owl, being one of the few successes of something called the Conversion Project. So, do you know who else was a success of the Conversion Project? Everyone who tried to assassinate Lief, as well as Mikkel's mother, who was the one who put the poison in Marilyn's cake. And today was the day that the Shadowlord will reveal the Conversion Project to all, controlling all Deltorans that he has and sending them back home. Devious. And a captured Dread Gnome from the rebels was going to be the example. So whilst the Dread Gnome was being taken to the Shadow Arena, our heroes are close by. But of course the plan fails and our trio get captured. Luckily Emilis doesn't, and this is when our trio get their first glimpse of Faith. And the shock on Barda and Lief's faces. So of course this is the right time for it, but Lief gets super angry at Jasmine for her not telling them about Faith, and to which she gets angry at him for all the secrets that he's hiding about his torn bride. Anyways, as they were injecting Faith with the Conversion Project, Emilis starts playing the Pirran pipe, and the people of Pirra who had gathered together underneath the sound of the pipe use their magic to pull every single Deltoran into the underground sea. And as Jasmine was reaching out to Faith, she disappears in a puff of red smoke, revealing that she was just an apparition that the Shadowlord made to basically get Lief to come to the Shadowlands. But Lief be smarter than that. So the Pirrans end up returning all the Deltorans to their homes, with everyone losing their memory as soon as they make it to the surface, with the exception of our trio because they're given memory stones. And this is when it's revealed to us that Marilyn is Lief's distant cousin and heir to the throne. Lief had left the Belt of Deltora with her, and so that's how she knew the cake was poisoned, because the amethyst, and he instead had taken a fake belt with him that he had forged in his forge. And so that is why the Pirrans couldn't feel its magic. And so this clears up all the misconceptions about his marriage, and he declares that he will marry for love. And so everything's all good for now. Obviously, the greatest theme in the book series is how deception, internalization of conflict, and love leads to misunderstanding, tension, and eventually the breaking of bonds between people. This is reflected in the story of the Pirrans themselves and in Lief and Jasmine's relationship. But it can be extended to almost every single character that we see in the series, like Glock, Jasmine, and Jers, Doom, Lief, and his mother, Doom, Jasmine, and Faith, Joseph, Bernish, and Marilyn, Joseph, his friend, and Mikkel, Lief, Barda, and Jasmine with the Pirrans, and just Jinx. Every relationship is tested and strained, stemming from a general distrust created by the Shadowlord's post-demise. From the Shadowlord's part, this was a perfect plan to divide Deltora again before it eventually starts to rebuild itself, isolating the king from his people by making him fear them, which leads to them thinking that he's selfish, leading to them rejecting their pledge. And then these fears would kind of be exaggerated with the second scheme that the Shadowlord pulls by targeting the king personally, so that he does act in somewhat a selfish manner, leading to lies to be mixed with truths. And that's why he then infiltrates the land and controls the flow of information and propaganda. And by that, he can slowly gain more control, more trust of the people, and take over Deltora again. He basically uses the creation of new goals and new focuses of the people to sow new chaos into the land. In order to keep the facade of peace, each individual, though they have different intentions, will strive to keep their doubts and personal gains a secret, hoping that it would do more good to act united than to admit that they have different motives. Look, this feeling comes from a genuine place of care for other people, but it's a very misguided path to keeping peace. Like, for example, when Joseph starts worrying about the developing nature of Ranesh and Marilyn's relationship, he chooses to send Ranesh off on a wild goose chase to keep him away from his beloved, than to admit that he's heard rumors that she is to be wed to the king. But obviously, the most glaring relationship in this entire trilogy is that of Lief and Jasmine's. Grappling with the new power dynamic added to their relationship after the last series' huge reveal, and now the differences in the time that they have and their responsibilities, the two start to drift apart, to both of their annoyance. And external influences also have a huge role in creating this, like Doom advising Lief to keep everything under wraps due to his untrusting nature, and Glock fueling Jasmine's carelessness and headstrong tendencies. But I digress. The beauty of this trilogy is Emily Rodda's ability to reflect the trio's internal squabble with its surroundings. The seemingly left-field plot of the Pirrans and the Pipe is an in-universe metaphor for Lief, Barda, and Jasmine's relationship. Starting from the splitting of the Pirrans into 3 tribes, Plume the Brave's music brought happiness, and those who were striving for happiness followed Plume. Barda the Fair's music made her audience weep. Those who were seeking awe and contentment followed her. And then finally, Creus the Unknown's music had his audience spellbound. So those who are intrigued and focused followed him. So the 3 goals of our tribes are happiness, content, and focus, which match the separate goals of our 3 protagonists. Barda's unwavering focus to bring the slaves back, particularly the people of Norads. Jasmine's unsatisfied need for connection, being a herald for her urgency in finding faith. And Lief's desire to make the people happy by reuniting broken families. And this is quite intentional because the tribe's history also matches what our trio go through. The Plumes tribe had sent members to the upper world to seek help from the king, only to be brutally killed and robbed by the Dallas. This event shaped their cautious nature, not really trusting the trio until it became logical to. Lief, who is very trusting in nature, outsourcing help from different people, starts to become more cautious due to the numerous assassination attempts on his life. And this caution manifests as secrecy, which he never really lets up until he feels like the threat has been eliminated. Even the cage used by the Plumes reflect Lief's inner feelings of trapped helplessness when he's hiding the truth from Barda and Jasmine. On the other hand, the Araran story, with their obsession with the truth, whilst hiding parts of it for their own personal gain and building a illusionary utopia, mirrors Jasmine's storyline really well, hiding her secret so that she can achieve the outcome that she wants, yet being mad at those around her for not being truthful, wanting an unrealistic situation which benefits her greatly. And then the Creons, which have an agreement of territory with the Arans, are willing to sacrifice for the greater good, despite it jerking on their maternal instincts. And this is Barda, the peacekeeper between Lief and Jasmine, and the voice of reason. His instincts of them being his children always coming in play when he's trying to protect them. And just as the Shadowlord had tricked the Pirrans to break up the pipe, the thing that he fears most, he tricked Lief, Barda, and Jasmine to break up too, targeting the youngest and naive in the group, Lief and Jasmine, because he fears our trio the most. The three that had defeated his guardians, the seven deadly sins, the three that rebuilt the belt of Deltora and reunited the tribes of old, the seven heavenly virtues, the three who had eventually banished him from the land. It was essential that he target his efforts into dismantling them before Deltora, because without this symbol of hope, the people will lose their energy for unity, recoiling back into their own divided needs, making them pray for deception and distrust once more. And all he needed was to plant the seed. The changed context of Lief and Jasmine's relationship was the fertile soil which allowed the seed to grow into the plan without the Shadowlord's involvement. They loved one another and they didn't want to see each other get harmed. So Lief hid his fears from Jasmine so that she wouldn't be caught in the crossfire, and when he desperately wanted to tell her, he remembered Doom's advice. Not wanting to fracture the new relationship between father and daughter, he had a further incentive to hide the truth. On the other hand, Jasmine pitied Lief, pitied his newfound responsibility and the immense pressure on his shoulders, so she didn't want to add to it. But not adding to it doesn't mean that she can't pursue her own personal goals, so she maintained her goals quite guiltily. At the end, none of their secrets did them any good. It was only the honest minds and hearts which ended up saving them and all the Deltorans from the Shadowlands, the Pirrans and Marilyn. Unlike any of these series' characters, Marilyn was the only honest and open person. She was open about using the belt, open about her feelings for Ranesh, and open to her father about the happenings of Del and her worries. Her honesty, combined with her caution and gentleness, gained the trust of those around her, and a little more than trust. But basically, she has all the hallmarks of being a good candidate to inherit Lief's throne. A lesson I think Lief definitely needs to focus on. And that's where I get to the next point. Do I particularly like the ending of the series? No. My biggest issue with it all is the mistreatment and the exploitation of the Pirrans, particularly by Lief. That's why he needs a lesson or two from Marilyn. To ensure that the Plume's people would continue to help them, the trio hide the reality that their explorers were seen as goblins and then ruthlessly slain by Deltorans. Glock? Not to mention that he is buried on Plume territory and heralded as a hero. But luckily, karma bites back with the Arons lying to them so that they would voluntarily enter the really, really dangerous dome. And due to the Arolin's deception also gaining the upper hand now, they repay them with the second piece of the pie, creating a benefit-benefit alliance more than anything else. And then with the Creons, they leverage their shared ancestral connection, exploit Emliss's curiosity to get him to put himself in danger for them. But uniting the pipe itself was enough for the Pirrans to put aside all their personal squabbles and extend their gratitude to the three. And instead of our trio admitting to the truth now, at the end, they just leave it so that they can maintain peace between the three tribes and between Deltora and the underground. This leads to a happy ending and our trio being the unseemly heroes, when actually they weren't. It just simply appears that way because the victory of uniting the flute was greater than the smaller moral injustices that our trio presented. I know it sounds really bad when I put it this way, but this actually reflects a greater reality. There is a lack of honesty in international relations in order to save face and get the best possible outcome. To push our interests and our goals further, we weigh the risk of truth and benefits of lying, or more accurately, just hiding the truth. So these books are not as innocent and straightforward as the original series. They delve more deeply into the human condition rather than keeping everything purely metaphorical, though it still uses metaphor to foreshadow our trio's journey. It does steer away from the classic knight in shining armor trope, opting to showcase diplomacy as a solution. I still like the series. I think Lief and Jasmine's characters go a long way, but it's not better than series 1. The Shadowlands series featuring the Cavern of the Fear, the Isle of Illusions, and the Shadowlands, of course. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to give it a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on the final Deltora Quest review, the Dragon series. As we are coming to the end of another series, it means it's time for you guys to suggest some more. I do have another reaction series coming up later in February, so make sure to keep your eyes out on that. But after that, it will be up to you. Be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.